The bell had barely faded when his voice cut through the hum of chatter, calm yet electric. The kind of tone that doesn't ask for attention. It commands it by truth alone. He stood before them, chalk dust still on his sleeves, and asked a question that made the room still as breath. What if everything you've been taught about success is a lie? Eyes lifted. Pens stopped midair. The air thickened with something no curriculum had planned for. Awakening. Outside, autumn leaves pressed against the glass, caught between wind and gravity. Just like the souls inside that room, suspended between what they were told to chase and what their hearts secretly longed to become. And in that fragile silence, the world inside four walls began to change forever. The bell screamed freedom, but no one moved. Some questions don't end when the bell rings. They begin there. The room emptied slowly. Chatter hushed, footsteps unsure. In the hall, whispers grew like wind through leaves. They said he was strange, reckless, even dangerous for saying what everyone secretly felt but never dared to voice. Yet among them a few eyes burned brighter. The ones who had heard not just words, but a mirror calling their souls awake. The world outside buzzed with schedules, phones, and grades, but something unseen had been planted in the silence. Truth, once spoken, doesn't fade. It echoes in the hearts that are ready to hear it. He sat in the empty faculty lounge long after everyone had gone home. A cracked coffee cup, a stack of ungraded essays, and the weight of years sat beside him. He had seen generations pass through his classroom, bright eyes dulled by fear, hearts tamed by the promise of safety. He had tried to teach what mattered, that a life without truth is a slow kind of death. But in a world built on performance, truth sounded like rebellion. He smiled to himself, whispered a prayer, and packed his briefcase. He knew what was coming, though he didn't yet know when. Some storms you don't predict. You prepare your soul for them. The next morning, he was called into the principal's office. The tone was polite, but the message was iron. Stick to the syllabus, they said, as if truth could be boxed and printed. He nodded, smiled, and said little. The walls were lined with awards, success measured in plaques and signatures. But as he stepped back into the hallway, the sunlight broke through the windows, and he knew he could never go back to teaching lies. You can silence a voice, but not the truth that shaped it. That night, he stood by his window, city lights flickering like restless thoughts. He could quit. He could stay silent, but silence was never what called him to this life. He remembered his first day teaching. The trembling voice, the eager faces, the sacred feeling that he was doing something that mattered. Now, that same fire burned again, fiercer than ever. Truth wasn't just a subject to him. It was a calling. And though he knew the cost, he also knew the worth. Some lessons aren't written on paper. They're written on souls. And tomorrow, he would teach again. By the next week, his words had taken root like sparks hidden in dry grass. What began as a whisper between a few students now burned through every hallway, every lunch table, every restless teenage soul tired of pretending. He had asked them to question not their grades, but their purpose. And that frightened people. Teachers spoke in hushed tones in the lounge. The principal kept his office door half open, listening for echoes of rebellion. Yet, Eli didn't preach revolution. He simply spoke truth with the weight of love. In a world that rewarded imitation, he reminded them they were born original. Some students rolled their eyes, others stayed late to talk, but the seed was already planted. And once truth finds a heart, it doesn't stay quiet. By Friday, an email had made its way to every teacher. A gentle reminder about professionalism and curriculum alignment. Between the lines, it was clear. Stop him. Some called him naive, others brave, but the students saw something different. A man who wasn't afraid to believe in them. In the quiet of the cafeteria, Sarah and Daniel debated what he meant. He's saying, "We've been chasing the wrong dream," Sarah whispered. Daniel smirked. "Or maybe he's saying we're too scared to chase the right one." Outside, the wind rattled windows as though the world itself agreed. Truth was coming, and nothing could silence it. He was summoned again. This time, the words were colder. They said he was disturbing focus, disrupting structure, blurring boundaries. But what they really meant was he was waking people up. The principal spoke with authority. Yet beneath his practiced tone was a tremor, the fear of losing control. Eli listened quietly, eyes patient but unwavering. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "If teaching them to think for themselves is wrong, then perhaps we should redefine what right means." Silence filled the office. The principal sighed, looked away. He knew this wouldn't end quietly. Neither of them did. That Monday, he walked into class with a new lesson written on the board. "The measure of a man is what he stands for when it costs him." The words hung in the air like prophecy. Students leaned forward, drawn by a gravity they didn't understand yet. He spoke of truth, not as opinion, but as a light that reveals everything, even the parts we'd rather keep hidden. He told them that life will always test the courage of our convictions. Outside, rain began to fall. Soft, steady, cleansing. Inside, his voice trembled, not with fear, but with purpose. And though he didn't know it yet, someone was recording every word. By dusk, the video had already left the classroom. A whisper turned digital, spreading like wildfire through the veins of the internet. Clips out of context, words cut and twisted. "Teacher tells kids success is a lie." Laughter. Outrage. Headlines. Screens flickered in homes and hallways, everyone having an opinion, no one seeking the truth. Eli sat at his desk in silence, watching the storm form on his laptop screen. He closed the lids softly, folded his hands, and whispered, "So it begins. Sometimes, truth doesn't just set you free. It sets everything on fire." By morning, the school was no longer a place of learning. It was a battlefield of whispers. Every screen glowed with his words, twisted into something scandalous. Some students laughed, others defended him fiercely. Teachers spoke in tight circles, afraid to be seen choosing sides. The principal's office door stayed shut, and yet, in the midst of the noise, Eli walked the halls with quiet peace. He knew storms reveal what foundations are made of. Some saw rebellion. He saw awakening. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Truth always costs something. But as he looked at his students' faces, divided, confused, burning, he knew it was worth it. In English class, the assignment was to write an essay about the ladder of success. Most students scribbled cliches, but one paper stood out. Sarah wrote, "The Lie of the Ladder." In it, she described a world obsessed with climbing, but never asking what the ladder leaned against. She wrote of courage, faith, and the cost of truth, words that trembled with raw honesty. When Eli read it, his eyes glistened. It wasn't just an essay. It was a reflection. His words reborn in another soul. That's when he realized, truth isn't taught, it's transferred. And once transferred, it multiplies. After class, Daniel lingered. The hallway was empty except for echoes. He looked down, voice low. "I recorded that video. I didn't mean for it to go viral." Eli didn't flinch. He simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Truth has its own way of being heard. Don't regret honesty. Regret silence." Daniel's eyes filled with tears he didn't expect. For the first time, he saw not a teacher, but a man willing to lose everything to live what he taught. That moment would mark him forever. Some lessons once seen can never be unlearned. The next day, The principal called a meeting. Teachers gathered in the staff room, the air thick with tension. Some spoke for him, others against. "He's crossing the line," one said. "He's teaching them to think," another replied softly. The principal tapped his pen against the table, silence falling heavy. Eli entered quietly, eyes calm, voice unwavering. "If telling them to seek truth is wrong, then I accept the consequence." No anger, no defense, just conviction. The room shifted. Even his critics felt something stir, a mixture of guilt and awe. Courage has a sound, and it is silence after truth is spoken. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, Eli returned to his classroom one last time. He looked around. The empty desks, the faded posters, the chalkboard still bearing half-erased lessons. He picked up the chalk and wrote one final line. "Truth doesn't need permission." Then he placed the chalk down gently, as though laying a weapon to rest. Behind him, the faint echo of students' laughter from days past seemed to linger in the air. He smiled, not in defeat, but in peace. He knew what was coming. The world might take his job, but not his purpose, because truth, once spoken from the heart, never dies. It only changes its messenger. The letter arrived before dawn, slipped beneath his classroom door. Immediate meeting. Disciplinary hearing. He held it between steady fingers, reading the words like scripture written in reverse. The halls outside were still dark, echoing faintly with the hum of ceiling lights. He'd always known truth drew lines that systems feared to cross. He wasn't angry, only certain. By the time the students arrived, rumors had already spread. Some cried, others clenched fists, and when he walked down the corridor toward the principal's office, silence followed him like respect. The world was about to test whether a man could keep his soul when everything else was taken. He stepped into the office, and the door closed like a gavel. Across the polished desk sat the principal, a man bound by policies that had long since outlived purpose. "You've crossed a line," he said. Eli smiled softly. Maybe the line needed crossing. Papers rustled. Accusations hung in the air, words like insubordination and influence. But beneath them lay a simpler truth: fear. Fear of thought, fear of hearts awake. He didn't argue. He simply said, "If truth is fire, I would rather burn than freeze." The principal looked away, unable to meet the calm in his eyes. Silence settled, the kind that changes rooms forever. While the meeting stretched on, students gathered outside the office doors. No one told them to. Something unspoken pulled them there. Sarah stood in front, trembling yet fierce. Daniel joined her, guilt long replaced by loyalty. Their friends lined the hallway, faces pale but determined. They didn't know what to do. Only that silence felt like betrayal. For once, they weren't following rules. They were following conscience. Inside, voices rose and fell. Outside, hearts learned unity. And when the door finally opened, the hallway was packed with the proof that one voice had already multiplied into many. The verdict came like winter wind, formal, polite, and merciless. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. The words drifted across the table, sterile and heavy. Eli nodded once. No protest, no anger, only quiet acceptance. He signed the papers, placed the pen down gently, and whispered, "May your rules never silence your reason." Outside, the students erupted into shouts and tears, but he didn't look back. Some endings deserved dignity. As he walked out beneath the fluorescent hum, his heart carried only gratitude for the chance to speak light into darkness, even for a moment. He walked the corridor one final time, box in hand, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a slow drum beat. Students lined both sides in silence. No applause, no noise, only reverence. Sarah stepped forward, tears streaking down her cheeks. You told us to find the truth, she whispered. And now we will. Daniel nodded beside her, eyes burning with promise. Eli smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to men who have already won battles the world can't see. At the door, he turned once more to look at the faces that had changed him as much as he had changed them. Then he whispered under his breath, "Class dismissed." By nightfall, his name was everywhere. News anchors dissected his words like they were crimes. Headlines flashed across screens. Controversial teacher denounces success culture. Half-truths dressed as outrage. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Parents demanded explanations. Strangers demanded apologies. Eli sat at his kitchen table, listening to voices that didn't know him, each one louder than the truth itself. But he didn't flinch. He simply whispered, "Let them talk. The truth needs no defense." For once, he wasn't speaking to anyone but God. And though the world was shouting, a stillness inside him grew louder. A peace that came only from knowing he'd finally lived what I'd always taught. Within days, the story exploded beyond the town. Influencers, reporters, strangers, everyone had a version of him. Some mocked, others praised. One clip showed him saying, "Success without purpose is failure in disguise," and those words alone lit social media aflame. Hashtags rose. Debates raged. But among the noise, something remarkable happened. Thousands of students around the country began sharing what success meant to them. His message, stripped of context, still carried light. It wasn't fame. It was fulfillment. The truth had escaped its cage and was finding its own wings. The classroom remained untouched for days. Chalk dust still lingered. The words "truth doesn't need permission" faintly visible on the board. Students began sneaking in during lunch breaks, sitting quietly at their desks like pilgrims visiting a sacred place. Sarah brought flowers. Daniel brought silence. They didn't need to speak. The room itself spoke for him. It held the echoes of courage. Every whisper of the blinds, every scratch on the desk carried memory. And though he wasn't there, his presence felt stronger than ever. Some absences speak louder than 1,000 lectures. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Sarah's doorstep. No return address, but she knew the handwriting. It was from him. "Sarah," it began, "don't let the world's noise drown out your own voice. What they call rebellion is often just honesty that doesn't fit the system. If they silence you, write. If they doubt you, love louder. The truth that costs you everything will one day give you more than you imagined." She read it again and again, tears smudging the ink. She realized he hadn't left them. He just handed them the torch. Months passed. The noise faded, as all storms do. But something lingered, a quiet movement, born from a man's defiance of silence. Schools began quoting his lessons. Students started community projects in his name. Sarah led a talk at the town hall titled, "The Cost of Truth." Daniel spoke about courage to his football team. The principal, once rigid, sat at the back of the room listening, his expression softened by guilt and respect. Change never announces itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, like dawn. And though Eli remained unseen, his words had rooted themselves deep in the soil of a new generation. In the weeks that followed, silence became his closest companion. Mornings were long, the kind of long that makes coffee taste like memory. The sound of children's laughter outside his window reminded him of what he'd lost. Not the job, but the daily miracle of shaping hearts. He tried reading, walking, praying. The world kept moving without him, but inside, something sacred was growing. It wasn't regret. It was peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting for a place in a world that was never meant to hold your truth. Some people chase noise. Others learn to listen to the silence between storms. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived. The district's seal was pressed into the paper like a warning. Inside, words cloaked in legality. "You are permanently barred from teaching within this state." no appeal, no signature of compassion, just bureaucracy. Clean, final, cold. Eli read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. They could take his classroom, his title, his paycheck, but not the truth that had already taken root. He walked to his window, watching the sky stretch wide and endless. Maybe, he whispered. It's time to teach a different way. In that moment, silence turned to calling. The knock came just after dusk. When he opened the door, Sarah and Daniel stood there. Older somehow, not in years but in spirit. They told him about the town meetings, the videos, the movement spreading beyond the school. You started something, Sarah said. He shook his head gently. No, I only reminded you what was already inside you. Daniel handed him a small envelope, donations from students, enough to start a small online platform. They want you to keep teaching, he said softly. Eli's eyes glistened. Truth had found its next classroom, one without walls. He began recording lessons from his living room. No chalkboard, no desks, just truth spoken plainly into a small camera. He talked about failure, courage, faith, and love. The things schools never graded. His videos were raw, unpolished, but real. People from across the world began watching. Comments poured in. You changed my life. I wish I had a teacher like you. It wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. The same freedom he once taught behind four walls. And every time he pressed record, he felt that same pulse of purpose that had once echoed through his classroom. The voice was the same, only the room had changed. Months later, he sat watching one of his old lessons play online. A moment captured before everything fell apart. Thousands had seen it, but he smiled as though it was meant for just one soul. His hair had grown a little grayer, his face softer, but his eyes still carried the same quiet fire. He no longer needed the world's approval. He had something greater, peace in purpose. Outside his window, dawn stretched across the horizon, and he whispered to himself, maybe the truth didn't end my story. Maybe it finally began it. The camera light blinked off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. The gym was filled with caps, gowns, and restless hearts on the edge of tomorrow. Sarah stood among them, holding her valedictorian speech, hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she carried. She glanced toward the back of the room where an empty chair sat in quiet tribute. That chair belonged to a man who had taught them more than any textbook ever could. When her name was called, she stepped up to the podium and took a deep breath. "This isn't just for me," she whispered, and as she began to speak, the air itself seemed to still, as if the truth was listening. Her voice carried through the hall. Steady, radiant, alive. They told us success was about climbing ladders, she said. But one teacher showed us it's about lifting others as we climb. The crowd grew silent, tears glinting in the light. He taught us that truth may cost us everything, but what we gain can't be measured. She paused, eyes searching the room as though finding him somewhere unseen. So if you ever meet someone brave enough to tell you the truth, don't let the world silence them. Listen, because truth is the only thing that will outlive us all. When she finished, the hall erupted, not with applause, but with understanding. In the farthest corner of the hall, hidden beneath the shadow of the bleachers, sat a man in a simple coat and quiet smile. No one noticed when he arrived, and no one saw him wipe away a single tear as her words filled the room. He didn't stay for the applause. He didn't need to. For him, the victory wasn't in being remembered. It was in seeing the truth alive in another heart. He rose quietly and walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind the sound of hope reborn. Some heroes don't return for glory. They simply return to witness the harvest of their courage. The ceremony faded into the distance as he walked down the quiet road leading out of town. The evening sky blushed in gold and lavender. Children laughed in nearby yards, their voices floating on the wind. He felt lighter than he had in years. Every step echoed with meaning, not loss, but fulfillment. He'd lost a classroom, but gained a generation. He smiled, whispering to the sky, "Thank you for letting me be part of their story." Somewhere far behind him, the school bell rang one last time, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have to answer it. Years later, in a college lecture hall miles away, a young professor wrote 5 words on the board: "Truth doesn't need permission." The students murmured. The phrase sounded familiar. On the professor's desk sat a framed photo, a gray-haired teacher standing beside a girl in a graduation gown. Sarah smiled gently before turning to her students. "Let's begin," she said. And somewhere beyond time, in a place where all truths meet, Eli's voice seemed to echo softly. Class never ends when the lesson is love. His story was never about defiance. It was about faith. That even when the world silences you, truth keeps speaking through those brave enough to listen. The legacy had begun its next chapter.